They say the best revenge isn't anger, it's silence. But in this case, the best revenge was walking down the red carpet of the Met Gala on the arm of the man who owned her ex-husband's debt. When Derek Reynolds signed the divorce papers, he tossed a ballpoint pen at his wife Sarah and told her she was expired goods. He laughed as he drove away in his Porsche with his 23-year-old assistant. He thought the story ended there. He thought he had won. But he didn't know that Sarah had a secret weapon, a meeting that would change the landscape of New York real estate forever. This is the story of how a discarded wife became the queen of the empire her husband thought he ruled. The air conditioning in the conference room on the 42nd floor of the Sterling and Cooper building was set to a freezing 65 degrees. It was a power move. Everything Derek did was a power move. Sarah Reynolds sat on one side of the mahogany table, her hands folded tightly in her lap to stop them from shaking. She was wearing a beige cardigan that had seen better days and a pair of trousers she had bought at Target. Across from her, Derek looked like he had just stepped out of a GQ spread. His navy bespoke suit was sharp enough to cut glass, and the Patek Philippe watch on his wrist cost more than Sarah's parents had made in their entire lives. "Let's wrap this up," Derek said, checking the time. "I have a tea time at the Hamptons at 3. Tiffany hates it when I'm late." The mention of her name, Tiffany, sent a sharp spike of nausea through Sarah's stomach. Tiffany was the brand consultant Derek had hired 6 months ago. She was 23, blonde, and possessed the kind of ruthless ambition that Derek found intoxicating. "We just need to review the final settlement figures, Mr. Reynolds," Sarah's lawyer, a tired-looking man named Robert Geller, said softly. Robert was a public defender friend of her father's. He was out of his depth here, and everyone knew it. Derek's lawyer, a shark named Simon Fenty, who charged $1,200 an hour, chuckled dryly. "The figures are generous, Robert. Extremely generous. Derek is offering a lump sum of $20,000 to assist with Sarah's transition, and he is allowing her to keep the 2016 Honda Civic." Sarah looked up, her eyes stinging. 20,000. "Derek, we've been married for 12 years. I worked 2 jobs to put you through business school. I edited every single proposal you sent to investors for the first 5 years of your company. That company is worth millions now." Derek leaned forward, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. His eyes, once the warm hazel she had fallen in love with, were now cold and hard like polished stones. "Correction, Sarah," Derek said, his voice smooth and condescending. "The company is worth multi-millions, and you typed a few emails. You made coffee. Don't confuse being a glorified secretary with being a partner. You were an investment I made that didn't yield a return. You're plain, you're unambitious, and frankly, you're boring. I've outgrown you." He pulled a checkbook out of his jacket pocket. He scribbled something, ripped the check out, and slid it across the polished wood. It landed right in front of her. "Here," Derek said. "I added an extra $5,000. Call it a severance package. Now sign the papers and get out of my life. I have a legacy to build, and I can't do it with an anchor around my neck." Sarah stared at the check. $25,000. For 12 years of her life. For the nights she stayed up helping him memorize his pitches. For the times she held him while he cried because he thought he was going to fail. She looked at Simon Fenty, who was smirking. She looked at Robert, who looked defeated. And then something inside her snapped. It wasn't a loud snap. It was quiet. It was the sound of a bridge burning. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She picked up the pen. "You're right, Derek," Sarah said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I was an investment. And you're right about something else, too. You have a legacy to build." She signed the paper with a flourish. "Just remember," she whispered, sliding the papers back. "Be careful who you step on while you're climbing up. They might be the ones holding the ladder." Derek laughed, a loud barking sound that echoed in the empty room. "Oh, honey, you aren't holding the ladder. You're just part of the pavement." He stood up, buttoning his jacket. He didn't look back as he walked out the door. Sarah watched him go. She took the check, folded it neatly, and put it in her purse. She walked out of the skyscraper and into the rainy streets of Manhattan. She stood on the corner of 5th Avenue and 48th Street, the rain soaking her beige cardigan. She felt small. She felt invisible. But as she stood there, watching the yellow cab splash by, a black Rolls-Royce Phantom pulled up to the curb a few feet away. The back window rolled down. Sarah didn't notice it at first. She was too busy trying not to weep in public. "Excuse me." A deep, gravelly voice came from inside the car. "Miss—" Sarah turned, wiping rain from her eyes. Inside the car sat a man who looked to be in his late 60s. He had silver hair, a neatly trimmed beard, and piercing blue eyes that seemed to hold a century of secrets. He was reading a file that looked suspiciously like a financial dossier. "Yes," Sarah asked, her voice cracking. "You dropped this," the man said. He held out a scarf, her cheap blue polyester scarf that must have slipped from her neck when she was digging for her subway card. Sarah stepped forward and took it. "Thank you. I'm having a bad day." The man studied her face for a moment. He didn't look at her with pity. He looked at her with curiosity. "You're the woman who just left the Sterling and Cooper offices. Sarah Reynolds." Sarah froze. "How do you know my name?" The man smiled, but it wasn't predatory. It was the smile of a man who played chess while everyone else was playing checkers. "I know everything that happens in that building, Sarah. I'm looking for an assistant, someone who pays attention to details, someone who has been underestimated." He extended a card. It was heavy cream-colored stock with simple black lettering. No logo, just a name and a number. Harrison Graves. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Harrison Graves wasn't just a businessman. He was a legend. He was the ghost of Wall Street. A recluse billionaire who hadn't given an interview in 20 years. He owned half the city's skyline, but nobody knew what he was planning next. I don't understand," Sarah stammered. "Call the number at 9:00 a.m. tomorrow," Harrison said. "Don't be late. And Sarah, yes, dry your eyes. Tears ruin the makeup, and they never fix the problem." The window rolled up, and the Rolls-Royce merged seamlessly into the chaotic traffic, leaving Sarah standing in the rain with a business card that felt heavier than gold. 3 months had passed since the divorce was finalized. The encounter with Harrison Graves felt like a fever dream, a hallucination brought on by stress and dehydration. Sarah had called the number the next day, of course, but there had been no answer. Just a voicemail that said the mailbox was full. She had tried again for a week, then gave up. It figured. Just another rich man toying with her. Sarah was now living in a studio apartment in Astoria, Queens. It was the size of a walk-in closet, smelled faintly of boiled cabbage, and the radiator clanked like a dying engine every time the heat kicked on. She was working as a temp at a logistics firm, filing invoices for $18 an hour. It was mind-numbing work, but it paid the rent barely. Meanwhile, Derek was everywhere. He was on the cover of Forbes 30 Under 30, even though he was 32. He lied about his age. He was in the New York Post's page 6, photographed on a yacht in the Mediterranean with Tiffany, who was wearing a diamond necklace that Sarah knew cost more than her entire divorce settlement. One Tuesday evening, Sarah sat on her futon eating instant noodles and scrolling through LinkedIn on her cracked phone. She saw a post from Derek. Thrilled to announce that Reynolds Tech is bidding for the acquisition of the historic Callaway building on Park Avenue. Big things coming. Hat Empire and Hamhunt Hustle nashed new money. Sarah frowned. The Callaway building. That was a landmark. It was owned by the Callaway Trust, one of the oldest and most conservative money funds in America. Derek's company was flashy, risky, and over-leveraged. There was no way a conservative trust would sell to him. Unless... Sarah zoomed in on the photo Derek had posted. It was a picture of a contract draft, lying on a desk. Derek had blurred out the text, but he hadn't blurred it enough. Sarah had spent 5 years proofreading his bad handwriting and correcting his sloppy formatting. She knew his tells. She squinted at the document in the photo. In the bottom corner, there was a clause reference number, Section 44B, subsection 2. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She remembered Section 44B from the old business law textbooks she used to read to help Derek study. That section usually referred to distressed asset liquidation via shell corporation. Derek wasn't buying the building legitimately. He was trying to use a shell company to trick the trust into selling, hiding the fact that Reynolds Tech was actually in debt. If the Callaway Trust found out who the real buyer was, the deal would implode. Sarah sat there, her noodles getting cold. She could expose him. She could write an anonymous tip to the Wall Street Journal. But then she remembered the man in the Rolls-Royce. Harrison Graves. Why had he given her his card? Why had the number never worked? She pulled the card out of her bedside drawer. She looked at it under the dim light of her lamp. She turned it over. On the back, written in extremely faint pencil, so faint she had missed it for 3 months, was a sequence of numbers, not a phone number. 40, 7484 DARE. N, 73.9857 DARE. 10:00 p.m. Tuesday. Sarah looked at her phone. It was Tuesday. It was 9:15 p.m. She typed the coordinates into Google Maps. The Empire State Building. Observation deck. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Was this real? Or was she losing her mind? She grabbed her coat. She didn't have money for a cab, so she ran to the subway. The N train was delayed. Of course it was. She stood on the platform, tapping her foot, checking her cheap wristwatch every 30 seconds. She arrived at the Empire State Building at 9:50 p.m. She bought a ticket with the last of her credit card limit. The elevator ride up made her ears pop. When she stepped out onto the windy observation deck, the city was a sprawling grid of diamonds below her. It was freezing. Tourists were huddled in groups taking selfies. Sarah walked around the perimeter, looking for... she didn't know what. A man in a suit. A sign. She found him standing alone in a dark corner away from the crowds looking out toward the financial district. He was wearing a heavy wool coat and a flat cap. It was him. The man from the Rolls-Royce. Harrison Graves. Sarah approached him slowly. The wind whipped her hair across her face. Mr. Graves. He didn't turn around immediately. You're late, Sarah. The train was delayed, she said, shivering. And I didn't see the coordinates until tonight. You saw them exactly when you were supposed to, Harrison said, finally turning to face her. His face was weathered, but his eyes were sharp. "I've been watching you, Sarah. Watching me why I'm nobody. I'm a temp living in Astoria." "You're a woman who knows where the bodies are buried," Harrison replied. He gestured toward the skyline. "Do you see that building, the one with the blue spire?" "The Reynolds Tech Tower," Sarah said bitterly. "Your ex-husband is about to make a very foolish move," Harrison said. "He's trying to acquire the Callaway building. If he succeeds, his company's stock will triple. He will become a billionaire overnight. He will be untouchable." Sarah clenched her fists. "I know. I saw the contract on his social media. He's using a shell company." Harrison raised an eyebrow. A slow smile spread across his face. "You noticed that from a blurry Instagram photo." "I know how he thinks, and I know how he cheats." Harrison nodded, impressed. "Good. That's exactly why I hired you." "You hired me?" "You never answered my call. I needed to see if you had the grit to survive on your own first. If you had crumbled, if you had gone back to your parents or begged him for money, you would have been useless to me. But you didn't. You took the temp job. You survived. You have hunger now, Sarah, and hunger is the only thing that matters in this city." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. "Inside this envelope is a job offer, not as an assistant, but as a consultant for Graves International. Your salary will be $250,000 a year, starting immediately. You will have a wardrobe allowance, a company car, and an apartment in Chelsea." Sarah stared at the envelope, terrified to touch it. "What do I have to do?" Harrison stepped closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I am the majority shareholder of the Callaway Trust. Derek Reynolds is trying to buy my building using a fake name. He thinks he's tricking a bunch of old men. He doesn't know he's trying to steal from me." Harrison's eyes gleamed in the darkness. "I want you to be the face of the negotiations, Sarah. I want you to walk into that boardroom as my representative. I want you to sit across from Derek and his little girlfriend, and I want you to destroy him. Not with anger, but with the one thing he lacks." "What's that?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and adrenaline. "Competence," Harrison said. "Are you in?" Sarah looked out at the city. She thought about the $25,000 check. She thought about expired goods. She thought about the rain. She reached out and took the envelope. It felt heavy. It felt like a weapon. "When do we start?" Sarah asked. "Tomorrow," Harrison said. "First, we need to get you some new clothes. You can't kill a king wearing a beige cardigan." The next morning, a Lincoln Navigator was waiting outside Sarah's crumbling apartment building in Astoria. The driver, a man with a neck as thick as a tree trunk, didn't say a word. He simply opened the door. Sarah left her keys on the kitchen counter of the studio apartment. She left the futon. She left the half-eaten noodles. She brought nothing but her purse and the clothes on her back. Harrison had been clear. "The woman Derek Reynolds divorced no longer exists. Do not bring her ghosts with you." The car didn't take her to an office. It took her to the Carlisle Hotel on the Upper East Side. Harrison Graves had rented out the entire royal suite for the week. When Sarah entered the living room, looked less like a hotel suite and more like a war room combined with a high-end boutique. Racks of clothing lined the walls, structured blazers, silk blouses, cashmere coats, and dresses that looked like liquid architecture. On the coffee table lay stacks of binders, financial reports, and blueprints. Harrison was standing by the window sipping an espresso. Next to him stood a tall, severe-looking woman with silver hair pulled back into a tight chignon. "Sarah," Harrison said, turning around. "Meet Beatrice. She was the personal stylist for the last 3 First Ladies of France. She is going to help you find your armor." Beatrice looked Sarah up and down with critical surgical precision. She didn't smile. She walked around Sarah, tugging at the loose fabric of her cardigan, shaking her head at the scuffed flats. "Posture," Beatrice said, her voice sharp. "You stand like an apology. Shoulders back. Chin up." Sarah straightened her spine. "I'm not used to this." "That is the problem," Beatrice said. "Rich men like your ex-husband smell insecurity, like sharks smell blood. If you walk into a room looking like you expect to be asked to leave, they will ask you to leave. You must walk in as if you own the oxygen they breathe." For the next 3 days, Sarah underwent a transformation that was as psychological as it was physical. It wasn't just about makeup and hair, though there was plenty of that. Her mousy brown hair was cut into a sharp angled bob and dyed a rich dark chestnut that caught the light. Her skin was exfoliated, hydrated, and polished until she glowed, but the real work happened in between the fittings. While Beatrice pinned hemlines on Chanel suits and adjusted the fit of Tom Ford trousers, Harrison drilled Sarah on the financials. "Why is Derek desperate for the Callaway building?" Harrison asked, pacing the room. Sarah looked up from a dossier, her eyes tired but focused. "Because his flagship software, Reynolds Cloud, is failing. The churn rate is 40%. He's bleeding cash. He needs the Callaway building because it sits on top of a massive fiber-optic hub that the city installed in the 90s. If he buys the building, he owns the hub. He can pivot from software to infrastructure and save his company." "Correct," Harrison said, slamming his hand on the table. "He's desperate, but he's hiding it. He's presenting this deal as a luxury expansion. He's lying to the shareholders." "So I expose the lie?" Sarah asked. "No," Harrison corrected her. "You let him lie. You let him think he's getting away with it. And then, when he's committed, you change the terms. You squeeze him." By the 4th day, Sarah looked in the full-length mirror and gasped. The woman staring back wasn't the tired housewife who had begged for a fair settlement. She was sharp, sleek, and dangerous. She wore a midnight blue Armani power suit that fit her like a second skin. Her lips were painted a deep crimson. On her feet were Louboutin heels, sharp enough to puncture a Tour or an Ego. Harrison walked up behind her, watching her reflection. "Derek Reynolds owes the Callaway Trust, and by extension, me a meeting to finalize the purchase," Harrison said quietly. "He thinks he's meeting with a senile board of trustees. He thinks he's going to bully them into a low-ball offer." He handed Sarah a leather portfolio. "Inside is the power of attorney. For the duration of this negotiation, you are the voice of the Callaway Trust. You have absolute authority." Sarah ran her fingers over the leather. Her hands weren't shaking anymore. "What if he recognizes me?" Sarah asked. "He will simply laugh. He'll tell me to go fetch him coffee." Harrison smiled, a cold, predatory glint in his eyes. "Let him laugh. Laughter is a distraction. While he's laughing, you'll be cutting his throat." The conference room at the Callaway Trust was old money personified. The walls were lined with oak paneling. The carpet was thick Persian wool, and the portraits of dead industrialists stared down judgmentally from gold frames. Derek Reynolds sat at the head of the table, checking his reflection in the screen of his phone. He looked bored. Next to him sat Tiffany. She was wearing a bright pink dress that was far too short for a corporate meeting and chewing gum with her mouth slightly open. "How long do we have to wait?" "Babe," Tiffany whined, scrolling through TikTok. "We have reservations at Nobu at 8. "Relax, Tiff," Derek said, spinning a pen between his fingers. "These old guys move at a glacial pace. They probably had to stop for a nap on the way to the meeting. We just need them to sign the preliminary agreement. Once I have the building, we can gut this place. Turn it into a modern glass box. Get rid of this smell of dust and poverty. Simon Fenty Derrick's lawyer looked nervous. Derrick, be careful. The Callaway Trust is notoriously difficult. We still don't know who the new majority stakeholder is. Rumor has it the old board was bought out last month. Does it matter? Derrick scoffed. Everyone has a price. I'm offering them 20% above market value. They'd be idiots to say no. Besides, I have the financing lined up through the shell company in the Caymans. They'll never know Reynolds Tech is the one buying it. The heavy double doors at the far end of the room clicked. Showtime, Derrick whispered, winking at Tiffany. Watch me work. The doors swung open, but instead of a group of elderly men in tweed jackets, a single woman walked in. The room fell silent. The woman was flanked by two assistants, men in black suits who carried briefcases. But nobody looked at them. All eyes were on her. She walked with a stride that commanded attention. The click-clack of her heels on the parquet floor sounded like gunshots. She carried herself with an air of absolute indifference to the people in the room. She reached the opposite end of the long table, pulled out the leather chair, and sat down. She didn't look at Derrick. She opened her portfolio, took out a gold fountain pen, and placed it neatly on the table. Only then did she look up. Derrick's mouth fell open. The pen he was spinning dropped from his fingers and clattered onto the table. Tiffany stopped chewing her gum. Sarah. Derrick choked out his voice an octave higher than usual. Sarah didn't smile. She didn't blink. She looked at him as if he were a smudge on a window pane. Good afternoon, Mr. Reynolds, she said. Her voice was different. It was lower modulated, devoid of the desperate warmth it used to hold. I apologize for the delay. Traffic on Park Avenue was dreadful. Derrick stood up, his face flushing red. Is this a joke? How did you get in here? Security? He looked around for a guard. Who let my ex-wife in, Sarah? If you're here to beg for more money, you're violating the restraining order clause in the settlement. Sit down, Derrick, Sarah said. She didn't shout. She just said it with such authority that Derrick's knees instinctively buckled, and he sat. I am not here as your ex-wife, Sarah continued, opening a file. I am here representing the Callaway Trust. My employer, the majority shareholder, has granted me full power of attorney to adjudicate this potential sale. You... Tiffany laughed, a shrill, grating sound. You used to clip coupons for laundry detergent. You're representing $1 billion trust. Please, who are you sleeping with? Sarah slowly turned her gaze to Tiffany. The look was so withering that Tiffany actually shrank back in her chair. Miss, I'm sorry I don't believe you're listed on the meeting agenda, Sarah said coolly. This is a closed negotiation for principals only. Unless you are a legal counsel or a financial auditor, I'll have to ask you to wait in the lobby. There are coloring books available if you get bored. Tiffany gasped. Derrick, are you going to let her talk to me like that? Derrick was still reeling. He looked from Sarah to Simon Fenty. Simon, is this legal? Can she do this? Simon was pale. He was looking at the documents Sarah's assistant had just slid across the table. Derrick, she has the seal. It's legitimate. She is the proxy. Derrick swallowed hard. He adjusted his tie, trying to regain his composure. He forced a laugh. Okay, fine. So you got a job. Good for you, Sarah. I'm glad you're moving on. But let's cut the theatrics. You know me. You know I don't play games. I'm offering $150 million for the building. It's a generous offer. Just sign the papers, take your commission, which I'm sure you desperately need, and let's go." Sarah picked up the document Derek had slid toward her. She didn't read it. She simply picked it up by the corner, as if it were dirty, and dropped it into the wastebasket next to her chair. The thud of the paper hitting the metal bin echoed in the silence. "The price is $200 million, Sarah said calmly. 200, Derek shouted, standing up again. "That's insane. The valuation is 140 at best. You're just doing this out of spite, because I left you." "I'm doing this because I did my due diligence, Mr. Reynolds," Sarah replied, leaning forward, clasping her hands. "I know about Project Orion." The color drained from Derek's face instantly. "What, Project Orion?" Sarah repeated. "Your plan to convert the sub-basement into a data center to save Reynolds Cloud from bankruptcy. You aren't buying a building, Derek. You're buying a lifeboat. And lifeboats are expensive when the ship is sinking." Derek stared at her. He looked terrified. Nobody knew about Project Orion. It was top secret. "How?" he whispered. "How do you know that—" "I know a lot of things," Sarah said. "I know that you leveraged your personal shares in Reynolds Tech to secure the loan from the Cayman Shell Company. I know that if you don't close this deal by Friday, your creditors will trigger a margin call and you will lose everything, including the Porsche, including the penthouse, including—" She glanced at Tiffany. "Your consulting budget." Derek sank back into his chair. He was sweating now, visible beads of perspiration on his forehead. "Sarah, please," he said, his voice dropping, the arrogance replaced by a desperate wheedle. "We were married for 12 years. Doesn't that mean anything? You can't squeeze me like this. You'll bankrupt me." Sarah looked at him. For a second, she remembered the man she had loved. But then she remembered the pen he threw at her. She remembered the laugh. "Business is business, Derek," Sarah said, echoing the exact words he had said to her when he refused to give her alimony. "You're an investment that didn't yield a return. Now, do we have a deal at $200 million? Or should I call the Wall Street Journal and tell them about the liquidity crisis at Reynolds Tech?" Derek looked at Simon. Simon shook his head. They had no choice. "Fine," Derek hissed. $200 million. You're a witch, Sarah. And you—" Sarah said, standing up and smoothing her skirt, "are over-leveraged. My assistants will draw up the final paperwork. Have the funds wired by morning." She turned to leave. "Wait," Derek called out. "Who is he, the majority shareholder? Who is pulling your strings?" Sarah paused at the door. She looked back over her shoulder, a small, mysterious smile playing on her lips. "You'll meet him soon enough, Derek. The annual Met Gala is next week. I suggest you buy a ticket, if you can still afford one." She walked out, leaving Derek Reynolds, sitting in the ruins of his ego, wondering how the woman he had discarded had just become the most dangerous person in his life. The wire transfer of $200 million hit the Callaway Trust's escrow account at 8:59 a.m. on Friday. Derek had made the deadline by 1 minute. Back at the Reynolds Tech headquarters, the mood was funereal. Derek sat in his office staring at his computer screen. His face was grey. To raise the capital, he had done the unthinkable. He had liquidated his personal stock options and taken out a high-interest emergency bridge loan from a private equity firm in Zurich called Chimera Capital. The terms of the loan were predatory. If Reynolds Tech's stock dipped below $45 a share for more than 3 consecutive days, Chimera Capital had the right to seize Derek's controlling stake in the company. "It doesn't matter," Derek muttered to Simon Fenty, who was pacing the room nervously. We own the building now. We own the fiber optic hub. Once we announce the acquisition, the stock will soar to $80. We'll pay off the Swiss loan in 2 weeks. But Sarah, Simon started. Don't speak her name, Derek snapped, sweeping a crystal vase off his desk. It shattered against the wall. She got lucky. She's a puppet. Someone is using her to get to me. I need to know who. Did the PI find anything? Simon hesitated. We tracked her movements. She's staying at the Carlyle. She's been seen entering and exiting the Graves International building. Derek froze. Graves, Harrison Graves. We don't know for sure, Simon said quickly. Graves has been off the grid for years. Some people think he's dead, but his company is still active. If Sarah is working for Graves. Derek laughed, but it was a nervous, jagged sound. Impossible. Harrison Graves only hires Ivy League prodigies and former CIA analysts. He wouldn't hire a community college dropout like Sarah. She's probably sleeping with some mid-level executive there. That's her ceiling. He stood up, adjusting his cuffs. Forget her. Tonight is the Met Gala. We are going to walk that carpet, announce the acquisition to the press, and show the world that Reynolds Tech is the future. Make sure Tiffany wears the red dress. We need to look like royalty. Across town, in the penthouse suite of the Carlyle, the atmosphere was very different. Sarah stood on a pedestal, while a team of seamstresses made final adjustments to her gown. It was a custom piece by Versace, a shimmering column of black velvet that transitioned into silver crystals at the hem, looking like a night sky crashing into the dawn. Harrison sat in a velvet armchair nearby, reading the Financial Times. The wire transfer cleared, he said without looking up. He took the bait. Sarah looked at him in the mirror. Over the last week, her fear had been replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. She understood the game now. He borrowed from Chimera Capital, Sarah said. I saw the filing this morning. Harrison lowered the newspaper and smiled. It was the smile of a wolf watching a sheep wander away from the herd. Do you know who owns Chimera Capital, Sarah? Sarah paused. She thought about the web of shell companies, the offshore accounts, the invisible strings that Harrison pulled from the shadows. You do, she whispered. Correct, Harrison said. I lent him the money to pay me. He is paying me. With my own money, plus interest. And in doing so, he has handed me the deed to his company. He stood up and walked over to her. He held a small velvet box. Tonight we close the trap. Derek thinks he bought a building. He doesn't realize he sold his soul. He opened the box. Inside lay a necklace that made Sarah gasp. It was the Ramahan sapphire, a stone that had been missing since the Russian Revolution. It was worth more than Derek's entire life. Wear this, Harrison said softly. Tonight you aren't just Sarah Reynolds, the divorcee. Tonight you are the Queen of New York, and a queen never bows. Sarah allowed him to clasp the heavy, cold gems around her neck. She looked at her reflection. The woman in the mirror was terrifyingly beautiful. She was powerful. She was ready. Let's go, Sarah said. I believe my ex-husband is expecting a reunion. The Metropolitan Museum of Art was a fortress of light and noise. Flashbulbs popped like strobes, blinding and relentless. The red carpet was a river of celebrity wealth and ego. Derek Reynolds stepped out of his limousine with Tiffany on his arm. He forced a wide, confident smile for the cameras. Derek. Is it true you bought the Callaway building? A reporter from CNBC shouted. Derek stopped posing for the perfect angle. It's true, he announced, his voice booming. Reynolds Tech is expanding. We are reshaping the skyline. The future is here. Tiffany giggled, waving at the cameras, desperate for attention. She looked pretty, But next to the movie stars and supermodels, she looked frantic, like she was trying too hard. They began to walk up the grand staircase. Derek felt a surge of triumph. He had done it. He had survived the Corsh crunch. He was a titan. Then the noise changed. It wasn't just the shouting of photographers. It was a collective gup, a hush that rippled through the crowd, followed by a frantic explosion of camera shutters that sounded like a machine gun battle. "Who is that?" someone whispered. "Is that? No, it can't be." Derek turned around at the top of the stairs to see what was distracting the press from him. A vintage black Rolls-Royce had pulled up. The door opened. First, a woman stepped out. She was stunning. The black velvet dress hugged her curves, the silver crystals catching the flashbulbs like diamonds. Her hair was sleek, her makeup flawless. Around her neck, the massive sapphire pulsed with a deep blue fire. Derek squinted. It took his brain 3 seconds to process the visual data. Sarah. It couldn't be. Sarah wore cardigans. Sarah drove a Honda. Sarah was plain. This woman was a goddess. But the shock of seeing Sarah was nothing compared to what happened next. A hand reached out from the car to take hers. A man stepped out. He was tall, dressed in a tuxedo that fit perfectly with a silk scarf draped effortlessly around his neck. Silver hair, beard, piercing blue eyes. The crowd went insane. "Harrison Graves!" a photographer screamed. "It's Harrison Graves. He's out. Mr. Graves over here." Harrison Graves hadn't attended a public event in 15 years. His appearance was the equivalent of seeing a unicorn, and he was holding hands with Derek Reynolds' ex-wife. Derek felt his blood turn to ice. His legs felt heavy, as if the gravity on the stairs had suddenly doubled. He couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. He mocked her. During the divorce, then froze when she stepped out with a secret billionaire. Sarah and Harrison walked up the red carpet. They moved with a slow, regal grace. They didn't stop for the shouting photographers. They just smiled at each other as if they were sharing a private joke. As they reached the top of the stairs, Sarah looked up. Her eyes locked onto Derek's. Derek was still frozen, his mouth slightly open. Tiffany was tugging on his arm. "Derek. Derek, who is that? Why is she with him?" Sarah stopped 3 feet away from Derek. The cameras were zooming in, capturing every micro-expression. "Hello, Derek," Sarah said. Her voice was calm, amplified by the sudden silence of the people standing nearby, who were eavesdropping. "Sarah," Derek stammered. He looked at Harrison. He looked at the man he had idolized, the man whose biography he had read 3 times. "Mr. Graves, I'm honored. I'm Derek Reynolds. I just acquired the Callaway building." Harrison looked at Derek's extended hand, but didn't take it. He looked at it with mild amusement. "I know who you are, Mr. Reynolds," Harrison said. His voice was deep, gravelly, and carried a terrifying weight. "And I know you bought the building. I sold it to you." Derek's eyes widened. But the trust. I am the trust," Harrison said simply. "And I am also Chimera Capital." The color drained from Derek's face so fast, he looked like a corpse. The world started to spin. Chimera Capital. The loan. The clause about the stock price. "You," Derek whispered. "You lent me the money." "I did," Harrison nodded. "And I'm afraid I have some bad news, Derek. While you were in the limo on the way here, my analysts released a report questioning the structural integrity of the Callaway Building's fiber optic hub. It seems the asset you just bought for $200 million is obsolete. Derek gasped. No, that's a lie. It's the market, Harrison shrugged. Reynolds Tech stock dropped 12% in after-hours trading. It's currently sitting at 44.50. Derek grabbed the railing to steady himself. 44.50. That was below the threshold. The loan, Derek choked out. The default clause. It triggered 10 minutes ago, Sarah interjected softly. She stepped closer, her sapphire glinting in his eyes. Which means Chimera Capital, and therefore Mr. Graves now owns the controlling stake in Reynolds Tech. She leaned in close enough that only Derek could hear her. You told me I was expired goods, Derek. You told me I wasn't a partner. You were right. I'm not a partner. I'm the boss. She pulled back and smiled, a genuine, dazzling smile for the cameras flashing away in the background. Enjoy the party, Derek. Try the champagne. I hear it's expensive. But don't worry. My company is paying for it. Sarah took Harrison's arm. Shall we, Harrison? We shall, my dear, Harrison said. They walked past Derek, entering the great hall of the museum. Derek stood alone at the top of the stairs, the flashing lights blinding him. Tiffany screaming at him to explain what was happening, his empire turning to dust in the cool night air. He had wanted to be a legend, and he was. He would go down in history as the man who lost everything because he underestimated his wife. The morning after the Met Gala, the sun rose over New York City with a cruel indifference. For Sarah, the light streaming into the penthouse suite at the Carlyle felt warm and promising. For Derek Reynolds, it felt like an interrogation lamp. He hadn't slept. He had spent the night in his office, or rather outside of it, when he had tried to swipe his keycard at the Reynolds Tech lobby turnstile at 2:00 a.m. The light had flashed red. Access denied. The night security guard, a man Derek had ignored for 5 years, simply shook his head and pointed to a cardboard box sitting on the counter. It contained a framed photo of Derek and Tiffany, a stapler, and his gym bag. Mr. Graves's team sent this down, the guard said, not looking up from his crossword puzzle. You're trespassing, Mr. Reynolds. Please leave before I call the police. Now it was 9:00 a.m. Derek sat in a coffee shop across the street, watching his own building. He was unshaven, still wearing his tuxedo from the night before, though the bow tie was undone and the shirt was stained with sweat. His phone wouldn't stop buzzing. It wasn't investors. It was creditors. It was the leasing agent for his penthouse. It was the dealer for his Porsche. The dominoes weren't just falling. They were being bulldozed. Tiffany sat across from him, scrolling through her phone with furious intensity. She wasn't looking for a solution for him. She was looking for an exit strategy for herself. This is ridiculous, Derek, she snapped, slamming her phone down. My credit card was declined for the Uber this morning. Do you know how embarrassing that is? I had to walk 3 blocks. Tiffany, please. Derek rubbed his temples. It's a temporary liquidity crisis. I just need to talk to the board. I need to explain that Graves tricked me. It's corporate espionage. I can sue. Sue with what money? Tiffany hissed. I read the news, Derek. Chimera Capital owns 51% of the stock. They executed the clause. You don't own the company anymore. You don't own anything. She stood up, grabbing her limited edition handbag. Where are you going? Derek asked, panic rising in his chest. I'm going to my sister's, she said cold. And then I'm going to change my relationship status. I signed up for the yacht life, Derek, not the subway life. Don't call me until you're rich again." She walked out. Derek watched her go. He didn't chase her. He was too tired. He realized with a sinking feeling that he didn't miss her. He missed the validation she gave him. He missed feeling like a winner. 2 hours later, the emergency board meeting began on the top floor of the Reynolds Tech Tower. The conference room was packed. The minority shareholders, the executives, the legal teams, everyone was there. The air was thick with tension. Derek burst into the room. He had managed to talk his way past security by claiming he had personal effects to retrieve. He looked manic. "Listen to me," he shouted, standing at the head of the table. "You can't let this happen. Harrison Graves is a predator. He manipulated the stock price. This is a hostile takeover." "Sit down, Mr. Reynolds." A calm voice cut through his hysteria. Sarah walked in. She was wearing a white suit today, crisp, clean, and authoritative. She didn't look like a vengeful ex-wife. She looked like a CEO. Harrison Graves walked a step behind her, acting as her silent enforcer. Sarah took the seat at the head of the table, Derek's seat. Derek stood there, trembling, unsure of what to do. "Mr. Reynolds is no longer an employee or an officer of this company," Sarah announced to the room. Her voice was steady, projecting to every corner. "As the representative for Chimera Capital, the new majority owner, I am here to restructure." She slid a folder across the table toward Derek. "What is this?" Derek whispered. "Your severance," Sarah said. "It's a check for $25,000. The room went silent. A few executives covered their mouths to hide their shock. It was the exact amount Derek had given her. "And," Sarah added, "we are allowing you to keep the lease on the 2022 Porsche, though you will have to make the payments yourself starting next month." "You can't do this," Derek cried, tears finally spilling over. "I built this I am Reynolds Tech." "You were Reynolds Tech," Sarah corrected him. "But you forgot the most important rule of business, Derek. A company is only as strong as its foundation, and you built yours on debt lies and the arrogance of thinking you were untouchable." She pointed to the door. "Security, please escort Mr. Reynolds out. We have a company to save." 2 guards stepped forward. Derek looked around the room, searching for an ally. He looked at Simon Fenty, his lawyer. Simon looked down at his shoes. He looked at his VP of operations. The man pretended to study his notes. Nobody moved to help him. Derek Reynolds, the young visionary, the disruptor, was led out of the room by his arms, sobbing. As the heavy glass doors closed behind him, Sarah didn't watch him go. She was already looking at the quarterly projections. "Now," Sarah said, addressing the board, "let's talk about the fiber optic hub. I have a plan to modernize it without bankrupting us." Harrison Graves smiled from the corner of the room. He had been right. She didn't just have hunger. She had vision. 6 months later. The charity gala for the New York Literacy Fund was the event of the season. The ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was filled with the city's elite. Sarah stood on the balcony holding a glass of champagne. She looked out over Central Park. Her life had stabilized. She was the CEO of the newly rebranded Graves Reynolds Industries. The stock was at an all-time high. She had moved out of the hotel and bought a brownstone in the West Village with her own money. She felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Harrison. "You look contemplative," he said. "I was just thinking," Sarah said, "about how much can change in a year." "You earned it, Sarah," Harrison said. "You saved the company. You saved the jobs of 300 employees who would have been fired if Derek had crashed the business." "I know," she smiled. "It feels good to be competent." "Speaking of Derek," Harrison said, nodding toward the street below, "I heard he's working again." Oh, he's a consultant for a mid-range paper supply company in New Jersey. I believe he drives a Honda Civic now. Sarah laughed. It wasn't a cruel laugh. It was a light, airy sound. The sound of someone who had let go of the weight of the past. I hope he's happy, Sarah said, and she meant it. She didn't need him to suffer anymore. His irrelevance was punishment enough. I have a proposition for you, Harrison said, turning her to face him. The London branch needs an overhaul. I'm too old to fly across the Atlantic every week. I need a partner, a full partner, 50-50. Sarah looked into his eyes. They were still sharp, but they were warmer now. Over the last 6 months, their mentorship had grown into a deep, unshakable bond. London, Sarah mused. I've always liked London in the fall. Then it's settled, Harrison said, raising his glass. To new beginnings. To holding the ladder, Sarah replied, clinking her glass against his. She took a sip of champagne and looked back at the city lights. She was no longer the woman standing in the rain, crying over a check. She was Sarah Reynolds, and she was just getting started. What a roller coaster of karma Derek thought he could toss Sarah aside like trash, but he didn't realize that in the game of life, the queen is the most powerful piece on the board. Sarah didn't just get revenge. She got justice, success, and a whole new life, proving that the best comeback is massive success. If you enjoyed this story of betrayal, twists, and ultimate redemption, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. What do you think? Did Derek deserve to lose everything, or was the punishment too harsh? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.